Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today, I have with me Giuseppe Sollazzo. He is the Deputy Director, Head of AI Skunkworks and Deployment at NHSx. I'm super excited to have him on the show. We're talking about applying Skunkworks thinking to artificial intelligence to support and help the NHS be more successful. Really close to my heart. I love what the NHS do. Such an institution. Excited to talk about it. Giuseppe, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming along.
Thanks very much for having me.
No worries. So much to unpack just in my little introduction there. So let's kick off with you and your background to start with, if we can.
Yeah, sure. So I'm head of AI Skunkworks at NHSx. I mean, we can go in a bit more detail about that later, but fundamentally, my role is all about rapid innovation and knowledge sharing of artificial intelligence technology within the NHS. But in terms of my background, I have a bit of a, unorthodox, unconventional background. So my previous job was head of data at the Department of Transport. I did that for a couple of years. And the role was basically about, selling the concept of good data within the department and within the sector and setting up teams. But previous to that, for about 10 years, I was fundamentally an IT guy at St. George's Hospital Medical School, which turned out into a great, let's say, gym for myself, because beyond the running the servers and all that, the data centers, the place was a small place, and therefore it required a lot of creativity in the way we delivered. So I ended up working with researchers. I ended up advocating for high performance computing facilities. I did research with some people doing medical statistics. So got into this magic word of policies, research data policy, which got me to become an open data activist, found myself advising the government on open data when open data was, let's say, cool. And that's what sort of got me into being interested in government, the public sector and all that. So that's more or less my journey. But I'm also pretty much a geek. I like to, get hands-on. I spend my weekends coding. So yeah, that's pretty much me, a bit of a all-rounder of data.
Yeah, it definitely seems that way. As you say, that is quite unorthodox, both in terms of the roles you've had, but also the kind of the path through those industries. But the public sector, medical, is that a particular passion for you, the public sector and medicine and those sort of services? Or
you sort of get very psychoanalytical here. So my dad is a doctor, he's just retired. My sister is a doctor. My brothers are radiographers. So let's say my home was all full of this like medical books. So I was a hypochondriac. So I think that's my relationship to medicine. And my first job actually was working in labs, in hospitals. I was working for a company doing software to automate labs. So just imagine this machinery being connected to databases, generated hundreds of thousands of records per day. And what was really cool back then, I mean, this is like 15 years ago when, we didn't even use the phrase big data or data science. And this was all big data. And it was also data science because we had developers working on, predictive things. Like we had this group of people who worked on using the results of antibiograms. So, the way patients react to antibiotics to predict whether there were, antibiotic resistant infections developing in the hospital. So this was great. This was data science before data science was a thing. And I've always sort of been interested in how the medical sector has been developing by, using data, because data has become a big thing in medical sector. It informs clinical trials, and now doctors are becoming more and more aware of how data is important to their jobs.
It's really interesting actually, because the retail sector has been put on a pedestal with its use of data and for targeted marketing and its ability to get products to people quickly and run the supply chain and that kind of thing. But actually, the medical profession, particularly research, in fact, specifically research, has been, as you say, all about big data analytics, predicting models of how different drugs perform, DNA coding, all that sort of genome, all of that kind of stuff, and that's sort of not really bubbled up as the pedestal industry for the use of data and in decision making.
No, and that's interesting because if you think about the medical science, collecting data, clinical trials, surveys, and all that has developed over time. I mean, for years, medical statisticians have been fundamentally looking at how mortality varies across population. And we've also seen the first, ethical problem developing in medical statistics back then. There's this thing about, if you look for, I think it's deaths by lung disease over time, you find a lot of data for men, but not for women, because originally there wasn't a lot of data collection for women. And one of the reasons, apparently, I'm sort of researching the history of this at the moment, was that women wouldn't take life insurance. And therefore, the reason to collect that data, that medical data, was actually for the existence of nature. So it's very fascinating. And I think medicine has gone through all that for a long time.
Yeah, it's interesting on that point. So I've had my own personal journey with lung issues, but which I won't go into now. But the time horizon that I'm with the senior clinician is 5 years, and when I asked him about that, it's all to do with insurance. It's not really to do with medicine. So 5 years is the sort of time frame that insurers care about the thing that I had 5 years ago, and it was just fascinating to me that was driven by money, right?
Indeed.
Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about, but fascinating nonetheless. And it's my brain sparking now with what we can learn from medical research, medical trials, qual and quant as well, obviously very, very big in those trials, both the sort of the actual specific data points and the survey data they get back from people. So yeah, brilliant. Right. NHSx. So I read a lot about it. I obviously know a lot of the NHS is. NHSx is relatively new, certainly in relative to the NHS. What is it? What's it there for? What work does it do? Why does it exist?
Well, NHSx is basically about a couple of years old. It is a program in a sense. It's a brand. In fact, we are people who work for NHSx are either working for NHS England or for the Department of Health. So it's about bringing together those two cultures, the two organizations. So the policy expertise from the department and let's say the delivery expertise from NHS England. And I would say it's probably, if I don't get it wrong, the largest or one of the largest healthcare digital transformation programs in the world. So it's all about transforming the NHS, helping the NHS adopting digital technology more effectively in a variety of spaces. And you will see NHSx as fundamentally, the classic directorates. We have a chief digital officer, chief information officer, all that. But we also have 5 clinical driven missions, which are all about specific areas of work in the NHS, like, for example, aging, diabetes, managing condition, helping patients with precision medicine and all that. And therefore, NHSx tries to adopt digital technologies to deliver these clinical missions. And my role sits in the AI lab, which is, let's say, a sub-program of NHSx, which is all about, making UK the international leader for AI in health and care, but practically means trying out this thing called AI that people talk about.
Brilliant. Right. That's a really clearest explanation I've heard actually of the NHSx and how what you do fits into that, which is brilliant. And is it the kind of full end-to-end sort of value chain of the NHS, or is it looking, specifically at the support of, provision of care, or management of hospitals, or supply chain of the products that flow through? Is there any sort of specific either priorities or focus that it has?
Well, there's a bit of everything. Once again, we are a sort of relatively young organization. There are end-to-end programs like there is a very big, very interesting eye care program. So it's about transforming eye care in a digital world. I have a very sort of vested interest in eye care. I'm a lay advisor to the Royal College of Ophthalmologists, and I'm fascinating about anything having to do with eye care because it's clearly very data-driven, very imaging-driven specialty. But as far as we're concerned, in the eye lab, we're trying really to cover all grounds of AI that range from, advancing knowledge of AI, which means sometimes working in the space of policy research, research in general. It means also getting, hands dirty with AI, trying out things that work, and that's fundamentally my program. We have the AI Award, which sort of tries to accelerate technology that has been built by others, like whether they are academic institutions or private companies. We have the imaging program. This is like a national program to try and look at collecting images that can be used for AI. So it's really about the full spectrum of issues and opportunities around AI.
Okay, amazing. And you're called Skunkworks. and I presume that's a purposeful, chosen purposefully. But what's the context of that? Why Skunkworks? How did it all cut? How did this AI Skunkworks thing come about, and how did it get off the ground?
So it's an interesting question. I have to say, this is the most hipsterish job title I've ever had in my life. Do you know the story of the word Skunkworks, by the way? Should I tell you the story?
I don't actually, and I've used it before in previous lives as a way of sort of like disrupting and doing some sort of guerrilla projects that was a bit underground and sort of bubbled up. But I don't know. I don't know the origins.
That's pretty much it. So the original Skunkworks was the name of the team in Lockheed. So it's a US aircraft manufacturer.
Right.
And this was before the war. They were sort of given this mandate from, I think it was the US Air Force, to experiment developing new aircrafts, because there was, a threat coming from the Germans, from the Luftwaffe. And what they did was basically to form this small team of engineers with a mandate to, they walled them off in the building to experiment with new features, to develop new aircraft. And they did develop new aircraft with novel features, and we know, they became sort of dominant during the war. And that's sort of the idea. It's the bringing that rapid innovation, focused experimentation to the NHS. And we sort of evolved that, the thinking. When I joined, there was a very short business case about what the Skunkworks was about. It was all about rapid innovation, but it wasn't particularly specific. And when I started, part of the work I've done is to basically test different ways of going about this idea of rapid experimentation. So we've evolved from having, let's say, almost a hands-off funding program. We did this with the hospital. We funded some of their initiatives, but we realized that was a bit limiting, and we moved into the space of co-production. So whether we work with suppliers or through our own internal capability, we are entirely geared towards knowledge sharing. So via case studies, playbooks, open source release, and all that. So
internally as well as externally. You said you want to be the leader in AI for healthcare. So is that published work? So at the moment, is it just sort of within the healthcare?
Once again, we've been in place for about 9 months now, so it's not a long time overall, but we're trying to fundamentally publish everything we do. And I think there's also a benefit in doing that by showing case studies, we will inspire others to say, oh, we could do something similar.
Yeah. Brilliant. And that's great. That's great sort of history of where that came about, and learned about Skunkworks, a phrase I've used for a long time, but now I know where it came from, which is awesome. So sort of in context of sort of NHSx, get it, and the NHS, and one of the things that I've been really excited about in the last sort of really 2 months, I think, since it probably was published, was the NHS published its data strategy, and it's asking for input, which is brilliant. It's sort of going broad to get buy-in and input to, and asking people for where it doesn't work, and challenges to it, and all that kind of thing. How does either the AI Skunkworks team or NHSx fit into that sort of data strategy?
I think the strategy is a very interesting piece of work. I mean, the headline "Data Saves Lives." I think it's very clear these days, and we lived through a pandemic for a couple of years, and with me being having my head in 2 countries, I'm Italian and British. I have been following this thing in the 2 countries with all the interesting work that data activists were doing across that divide, and it's become evident that we need data, we need better data, we need clear data. We also need to understand what data is telling us. And I think the data strategy is really capturing all these ideas, is that to deliver better care, we need better data. Data needs to be understood in its context. There are areas where there is no data. I mean, what's very interesting, I really like, I was reading really in depth chapter 4 of that data strategy, which is about adult social care, and it's quite evident that there isn't enough data in social care, and therefore we need to sort of start building the platforms and the policies around collecting that data. But what's really interesting is that it's really good to see in a strategy, in a national level strategy, the idea that data requires trust, data requires confidence from the patients in what we're doing, which is really, really an important topic. I think the pandemic once again has shown how people are ready to trust that data when that data is linked to a benefit. But sometimes, what I always say is that decisions about data need to be taken at peacetime, not during a crisis.
Yeah.
And in order for us to do that, we need to gain, the confidence of the public and the trust of the public. So it's really good that the strategy does that and gives trust and confidence, like I would say almost the first shot, the first chapter is all about that. So it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, well, of course, trust, particularly at a national level, has got to be front and center. So, and then I guess that plays into artificial intelligence and the work that you do. There's still a bit of skepticism, still a bit of worry and concern about this black box that's going to decide on my healthcare and my future. And so trust is clearly an important component of that. And I actually think this NHS data strategy is one of the most important data strategies written, certainly in the UK, but I think it can set the standard for the rest of the world. So I'm really excited to see where that goes. In terms of, and it's the question's a little bit kind of related actually, is so you've got this AI Skunkworks team. Its priority is to try things out, innovate quickly, rapidly progress solutions to market, I guess. But there's obviously a risk there that you invest a whole bunch of money that doesn't deliver on that's just the nature of testing and innovation, is there's going to be a load of stuff that doesn't work, right? And so I'm just sort of fascinated by how you sort of blended the kind of need to give value for money back to the UK and the government and people that live here and contribute, but also balance the need to innovate and fail and try new things.
So I mean, I'll make the same. No apologies about the fact that I'm actually keen on failure in this space. And actually, the program is not, it's not a massive program exactly for that reason. That's the reason why we want to do rapid agile innovation here. We clearly aiming to get an outcome that provides the organization we work with a proof of concept, but our mandate is to get into that proof of concept and to share that knowledge. Is not to deliver, let's say, a full stack, full spectrum digital service. So I think in that respect, it's probably a very good value for money approach to provide the NHS with the ability to engage with AI and to develop things in the context in which they deliver. I mean, we have been working on a variety of projects. I can mention a few, but the general idea is we welcome organizations in the NHS to come to us with their own problems, and we help try AI to address those problems.
Right.
And sometimes this is about, creating a model that performs better than the baseline. But some other times it's not just about that. It's also about training the organization to think about AI, because of course the way you productionize let's say a traditional, let's say linear regression model is different from the way you productionize just to mention one hipsterish technology we've been using recently, a generative adversarial network. The way the organization needs to understand these two technologies, these new methods, is different. And so we're also trying to provide the organization with a way over usually no more than 3 months to think about what it means, what it would mean if they decided to go that way, to productionize and support a new type of technology.
Amazing.
And of course, go ahead.
No, go for it. Sorry.
No, the one thing I wanted to say, yes, of course, there's a lot of skepticism around AI. And to be honest, I am a skeptic myself. I don't think that AI has all the answers. What I know is that if we don't try, we will never learn. And one important thing we're doing with some organization is actually to, sort of hold hands with them. There is a project we're following at the moment, which is about recruitment, using AI for recruitment, right? I mean, there's a lot of that. There's products out there that do this. But the real question is, can we actually look together what it means to control bias when we use AI for shortlisting? And therefore we're bringing in our own AI ethics experts to sort of monitor that project. And we will never recommend it to go live unless we are satisfied that the ethics sort of work. But once again, those models will need to be managed over time if they ever become live. And we want that ethical thinking to be embedded in that sort of almost machine learning operations kind of activity.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think I think the fact that you're, almost, carefully managed from a budget and funding point of view, so that you don't, do try and bite off too much and spend too much on things that don't work. The fact that actually you're doing things in a kind of POC, quick, fast, rapid innovation way just means that you only invest as far as you need to go in order to test the concept. But the really good thing is the things that work, you've pre-tested, so it's then worth investing, or certainly investing to take them to the next level. So you're only ever going as far as you need to go, and if there's appetite and need, then you push harder. And the other thing I love, actually, you're sort of talking about sort of AI skunkworks, and that you start thinking technology there, but actually you're testing new ways of thinking, new ways of working, new ways of deploying, new ways of engaging with the organization at a whole. So it's almost like a cultural trial, a cultural sort of MVP and iteration, if you like, as well as something that you're physically building.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, once again, we get to proof of concept, and the plan is that whenever we have, let's say, a proof of concept is about code, we will release that, because that way we build opportunities, whether they are for other NHS trusts to use that source code to do their own thing, or for private companies to take that and build their own products. That's what we want to do, is like to show the opportunity, making sure that what we've done is sort of safe and sound and ethical, but then say, look, you take this product and you go with it.
Yeah, fascinating. So you've touched on there a few, sort of started to explore a few areas that you've been sort of focused on. I'm quite keen to understand a little bit about kind of who you support, and how this manifests itself in the real world, and some of the use cases that either you're have done in flight, planning to do, whatever level you're able to talk at. That would be great to hear some examples.
Yeah, well, we work with all organizations in the NHS. Now, the NHS is actually a complex ecosystem that includes NHS Trust, includes other types of organizations. And the Department of Health, for example, has this huge list of agencies connected to it, which are not necessarily common sense healthcare. Like, for example, the Food Standard Agency is an organization we are currently working with, which is in the healthcare space, but not quite healthcare as intended by people. Yeah. But what we do is simply to ask this organization to tell us about their problems, to tell us about what they face in their let's say everyday working life, and what we do is simply to say, well, if a problem usually has a forecasting and aspect, an analytical aspect, we can probably help you with testing an AI idea that works with that, and then compare maybe with more traditional approaches. So that's generally what we work with. So we work with NHS Resolution, which is the organization that deals with claims and issues in the system. We work with a couple of hospitals. We were sort of scoping a project with Queen University Belfast is one that has come to us with an interesting idea. We work on the spectrum of problems that affect healthcare, whether they are clinical problem or non-clinical problem. So we published a case study recently. The work we did with NHS Resolution was fundamentally just a data analysis. It was helping them understanding the nature of their claims, trying to unearth patterns and that sort of thing. We worked actually with colleagues in NHSx on building a sort of a proof of concept for a search engine that uses natural language processing to answer queries in multiple languages. We're doing a very interesting project at the moment, which actually I should write about soon, about modeling long stayers. This is a problem that came to us through an hospital in Gloucestershire. And they said, look, we have this problem about people who stay a long time in hospitals. Staying a long time in a hospital bed correlates usually with worse outcomes. Some patients that do less well. Right. And they were asking us, can we use AI to make better prediction than the predictions we have at the moment? So as you can see, it's a bit of a spectrum of problem and range from the administrative to the clinical. I think the sky is the limit in this.
And who do you tend to work with? Who's your kind of stakeholder, if you like, in these? Does it just change depending on the use case?
It does, but I would say there are three broad categories. So we have the people who work with data as their daily job. So people who do business intelligence for a hospital. Usually they will tend to be very data driven, very aware of the potential data, but maybe they never tried AI, and therefore they'd like to explore that. Sometimes we have clinicians. Usually it's clinicians who can code. There's actually quite a few out there. They're absolutely talented. in one case, we're working with someone who's been, actually using AI in their daily work, but they wanted to see, is the AI I'm using the right type of AI? So we're supporting them. We work with, at the moment, we're doing this very interesting project with the radiology team in a hospital, so clinicians, and we're actually helping them look at the problem of aligning CT scans, which is a very manual process in the life of a radiologist. So yeah, I would say it's a very broad spectrum of people. I had very interesting conversation with nurses. Nurses are intensely information driven, and they all their life is about managing risk. We haven't launched any projects with any nurse yet, but I think that's going to come soon as well.
Amazing. And it's such a broad, you say, such a broad spectrum of people and use cases. How do you prioritize all of that stuff? Is it kind of how does that work?
So I think the nature of Skunkworks is we go where there's a need. That's to say the tagline. The reality is there is an NHS long-term plan. If we find ourselves in a situation where we need to choose, we will sort of prioritize alongside those lines. Like, for example, at the moment, we're really, really working hard to find problems in the space of social care. Once again, it's very important, and recognized also by the data strategy, and also in the self-managing of conditions. I think that there's a number of apps out there, for example, for a variety of conditions, whether they are mental health issues, or it's managing diabetes or others. And we think that there's a lot of potential in there for AI, but at the same time, there might be not enough data sometimes. So actually, we're working on a few, let's say, enabling projects, so showing organizations that if they want to work with AI, they need to have the right amount of data, the right variety in their data. In dermatology, this is quite a well-known project. So the problem, the fact that there's the way algorithm can be trained on people with a variety of skin shades might affect the ability to use those AI algorithms in the detection of certain conditions. So the question is, what's the right approach? Is the right approach to have a single model that covers all skin shades? Is that to have a model per skin shade? There's an official scale used called the Fitzpatrick scale, I think. And it's about also developing these questions. It's like when someone comes to us with ideas, it's like, can we support them really going in depth into understanding what that idea implies in terms of data quality, data accuracy, and the consequences of bias in their thinking.
Yeah, because this is, as you say, it's quite new to this field, and there's a big sort of focus on it. The data governance challenges that you're talking about there and data quality challenges, I guess, are kind of twofold, sort of quite a sort of macro level anyway. There's the lack of, potentially, and I want to understand this, the lack of governance around the data that exists and that is created, and therefore the issue on quality, and therefore the impact of the thing that you're trying to achieve most, which is trust, that you talked about at the start. And then there's just that you don't collect the data at the moment, and there's something that people want to understand, and we don't, there's a sort of a early stage of the data value chain of collection. How do you is that something that you and your team need to, and sort of responsible for sorting, or is there sort of separate, more sort of foundational governance work that's going on that's targeting, and how do you connect the dots?
Oh, we're definitely in the business of supporting the organization we work with go through all this. And once again, governance, data governance is a key element, and it's not just a tick box exercise. But at the same time, it shouldn't be like a computer says no situation. Yeah. What we try and do is to make the teams aware of what are the duties in their compliance, because ultimately we're not going to be holding that product. They will be holding that product. So the responsibility for going, let's say, through the Health Research Authority compliance and then data protection is theirs. Usually teams that come from an academic background tend to be more, let's say, well-versed into all this, because they used to have, ethics committee and research approvals. But we try and make sure that that's a conversation and that's not a blocking situation. But there's also, I think, an understanding here, like encouraging teams to really think what, data governance means, data quality means, and that's very context dependent. Sometimes about, sort of, I would say educating is a bad word, but organizations that have been having, let's say, contract with data providers for a long time. Sometimes, they never thought about the necessity of extracting data. So they need to learn how to amend those contracts and how to bring their suppliers in that conversation.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's varied.
And I imagine because of course it has a big impact on, I suppose, your ability to deliver the AI solutions, and B, if you can build the the models, the success of the output of those models, they're kind of really closely linked. So do you kind of turn down work because the quality of data or the governance of data isn't strong enough, and then there's a program of work to sort that before you come back to the AI, or do you kind of do it the other way around of building models and to show that the quality isn't strong enough to reach
absolutely. So we have actually put projects on hold because of that, and I recommended the team to do their work first. But once again, we keep these conversations going, and it's a learning journey for us. I mean, there are I've worked with data for a decade, and definitely I can think of all the information governance issues around it. I mean, I was involved in implementing IG toolkits back in the days in my organization. But there are new problems, and sometimes AI is so new that not even the ethics committee in a university will be able to really understand what it's like. And once again, for us, the big win here is to learn about what's needed and learn what are the specific issues with AI, so that the system can become more sound in its approach. So once again, yes, it's about delivering proof of concept, and that's what really gets me going. And I love publishing open source code and all that. But at the same time, if we can learn and share that learning with NHS organizations, they will become better at not just adopting AI, but also challenging AI when they need to challenge it.
Fantastic. I mean, the one of the things that we haven't really mentioned actually is the kind of patient in all of this, and I suppose the end point and the outcome here is better patient support, better patient care, better patient outcomes, and of course to do that we need to get better hospitals and support hospitals better, and the clinicians and the nurses and everyone that's in them. Is there a lens on this which is about the patient? And if so, is that just sort of the success of the patient or the success of the outcomes is a byproduct of the things that you're working on, or is it the center of the things that you're working on?
Well, yes. The short answer is yes. There are different ways in which this manifests itself. So, for example, the project I was mentioning with Gloucestershire hospitals, about making sure that they can better model the how long a patient is going to be staying in the hospital.
Yeah, of course.
Sort of enables a bit more direct oversight of that patient.
Yeah.
But there are other projects. We did a project with the Kettering Hospital about RPA, and it was an automation of COVID reports. This was back in the pandemic, and clearly that didn't have a direct patient outcome type of result. However, the staff time that was freed up by not having to do those reports manually clearly had a knock-on effect on the ability of these clinicians and hospital staff to dedicate their time to patients. So we always need to be aware of that.
Yeah, and that makes sense, and it's got to link back to that in some way, I guess. Brilliant. Well, look, I so much here, and you're 9 months in, making some brilliant progress. I love the sound of this department that you're running. I'm fascinated by the program and how it impacts, and just go back to the thing we talked about at the start in terms of the learnings that the health, particularly sort of medicine and R&D that's happened, and what we can learn there. Some of these things are lifetime generational or lifetime impact, and it takes a long time to know whether the thing that you're doing really is changing an outcome. So, but then there's other micro things that you can learn along the way. So I think it's fascinating, the work that you're doing. Massively appreciate you coming on the show and talking about it. Now, one thing I did just want to say, which you didn't mention in your opener, I think you run and publish a newsletter talking about all the things that you mentioned and sort of your world. Where can people find you?
They can find me on Twitter at Puntofisso, Puntofisso. If they Google my name, there's not many people called like me in the word, so they will find my website. They'll be able to subscribe to my newsletter. Yes.
Brilliant. Well, and you've been running it for nearly 10 years, I think. So it's some good juicy stuff on there, which I had a look at.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Everybody, I hope you enjoyed this episode. It was brilliant to talk through all of this with Giuseppe. And there's a little collection of sort of medicine and NHS and healthcare discussions that we've had and are going to have. So hopefully this contributes to that discussion. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll catch you again soon.
Thank you very much for having me.